Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. In honor of spooky season, we're worming our way through some of our favorite gruesome twosomes. Up for consideration today, Tremors. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead. Good morning, Whiskey. This is your wake-up call. Please move your ass.
Hey, it isn't morning.
Well, it is somewhere.
It's also 5 o'clock somewhere. Welcome back, everybody.
Hey, everyone. We're back with more exciting... What did you call us last week? It was something duos?
Gruesome Twosomes.
Gruesome Twosomes. So I didn't even have the right alliteration. Gruesome Twosomes is back with this month on Reels on the Rocks. But before we get into that, I understand, Whiskey, you have something exciting for us to be talking about today.
Well, exciting is a relative term. They did it again, ladies and gentlemen. Variety released another one of its lists. And maybe there was one in between. Last time I remember them releasing a list, it was their 100 greatest animated TV shows of all time. And my biggest gripes with it were, one, and this is coming from someone who's not a Family Guy fan, but not even not Family Guy, but no Seth MacFarlane show was added, and I feel like that's ridiculous. As someone who doesn't even really like Family Guy that much, it deserves to be on the list. And
just from its cultural impact alone. Yeah.
And then instead of The Simpsons being at number one, they put Batman the Animated Series, which, hey, you know, it's one of my favorite animated shows of all time, but I kind of feel like Simpsons deserves the number one spot.
Yeah,
making and I remember going through the list. And I can't remember every show on the list. I remember going through it at the time. I feel like it was a while ago. It was like 2017, 2018, something like that. So maybe they've released a list since then, but I didn't notice that they did. But they released their 100 greatest horror films of all time. And it's a Critics' Choice list, so the authors are just a whole gaggle of people. And I would just encourage you, if you're curious, to look at the list yourself. I just told T to make some notes on what his thoughts on the list are. I have made copious notes myself, but for the most part,
I don't know if I have copious notes because I ran through the entire list and I wrote down my thoughts, but out of the 100, it turns out I'd only seen 27 of them.
Yes, I've seen a bunch of these.
It's actually higher than I thought it was going to be, so I feel a little proud of myself.
Yeah, so I've seen a bunch of these because there's a lot. So I don't know if I ever mentioned this. Way back when I was a teenager, a girl I dated in high school for like a Christmas present got me the 101 horror movies to see before you die. Mm-hmm. And I was making it a mission to see all of the movies, and I've pretty much done it. It's mainly just like weird,
obscure ones,
or like hard to find movies.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like things from like the Soviet Union in the 30s.
Yeah.
You know, things like that, where it's just like, where do you even find the movie? And then some of them were kind of easy. Like there's a bunch of silent movies that were available on YouTube at the time and stuff. But anyway, so I've seen a bunch of these. I have not seen all of them, but I definitely have seen enough to have an opinion. But kind of like the animated TV show list, nothing really offended me too much. So I wasn't particularly put off by any of the choices, but I'm going to guess that you and I had the same issue. And that's that number 2 should have been number 1. Exorcist is at number 2. I've mentioned, I don't know if I've said this on the show before, but I've mentioned to you that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is pretty influential, especially like with modern horror. So it's one of those where I don't really feel that it's a bad idea to put it at number 1. But the reason I'd go with The Exorcist is that it kind of checks a lot more boxes. One of the reasons you and I both like it is that it works not just as a horror movie, but it's a good like medical drama. There's a bit of like a question of faith going on. Like it's one of those.
It's also
movies
like a whodunit a little bit.
Exactly. So I feel like there's a lot more that people can get out of it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is fine, but it's very simple. Like, it's one of those I've thought of potentially doing on the show, and I know that T would be terrified of watching it, but it's not as bad as it sounds. Especially by today's standards.
I'd have to put it. I probably have to watch it like I did the first Friday the 13th. I'm watching it on my black and white. Because it's less scary on there.
Honestly,
actually, it is a black and white if I remember correctly.
It's so misunderstood that I don't even think that studios understand it, because they keep trying to make sequels like slasher films, and that's not what it is. It's not a slasher film. Like even with like horror merchandise and stuff, I see Leatherface, put in the same category as like Ghostface and Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, and it's like, it's not a slasher. I understand why people might have that understanding about it, but I will argue with people about this. It's part of what makes it scary is it's low budget. It feels like you're watching like a snuff film. It's weird, but there's not a lot of gore. Again, like, if you're a modern person, I don't think it's going to be quite as terrifying as it was in the 70s, but there's just this like grittiness to it that's really intense. And it's despite its sounding really intense, it's one of the few horror movies I genuinely recommend everybody see at some point, unless you're like a toddler or something. Like, assuming you're old enough to see R-rated films, it's one of those that I would recommend. But otherwise on the list, number 3 is Psycho, number 4 is Jaws, number 5 is Rosemary's Baby.
Pause. Okay. So Jaws, I'm going to bring up a couple things here, and you'll probably disagree with me on this. So when I went through the list, there was a few things I personally felt like don't even belong in the horror category. And I kind of put Jaws in that list because to me, it's more of a thriller. And
I agree with you.
I mean, it does have the suspense with the music, but like if someone were to like name if I were to name like horror movies that I've seen a ton, Jaws wouldn't even enter my mind. I put like Jaws, I put Jaws, and they also list King Kong somewhere on list.
King Kong is another one.
And I kind of put those together.
It's one of those, it's in my book, the 101 horror movies to see. And it's kind of one of those where I don't personally consider it a horror movie exactly, but I know a lot of people are afraid of sharks, and there is kind of a horror element to it. So it's one of those where I'll just go meh. Like, it doesn't bother me that much if people want to consider it a horror movie. And same thing, like King Kong by today's standards is not really scary, but if you put yourself in that time period, and also like there was some stuff that was omitted, like people being eaten by like giant bugs and stuff. Like there was kind of a scary element to, the dinosaurs and all this other stuff at the time. I would consider it an adventure movie, because that's another one. You don't see Jurassic
there you go, an
Park
adventure
on
movie
like this. Yeah,
that's what I'm looking for, adventure.
No, exactly. But like Jurassic Park is scary, but you never really see it on horror lists either. And that's kind of the same category I'd put those movies in, like scary adventure movie, with maybe a monster in it or something. So no, I don't disagree with you. And so it's just one of those things where I personally don't even think it should be on this list. However, it's put on horror lists so frequently that I just sort of shrug my shoulders the same way as King Kong. But Rosemary's Baby, number 5, Night of the Living Dead, number 6, Audition, and I'll come back to this in a second.
Yeah, that's
Audition,
the one I wasn't
7.
familiar with. I was not familiar with that one.
So Frankenstein, number 8, number 9, Salò, 120 Days of Sodom, and number 10, Carrie. So Salò and Audition, I'm kind of torn at putting them at number, like, in the top 10. Salò is like borderline not even horror. It's just as messed up as you can think of. Do you know what Salò is, T?
You mean the 120 Days of Gomorrah or whatever it's called, or Sodom? That one?
Sodom. Yeah. Do you know what it is?
Okay, I've never seen it. I've heard enough discussions about it to get kind of an idea of what happens in it, and I'm pretty okay never watching it.
Yeah, it's basically like you were talking about a Serbian film.
Yes.
It's basically that before that happened. And it's another one of those where like the director was trying to make a point about the government. And he mysteriously died after making the film. That's like a whole other... Maybe the government actually was a bit corrupt. But anyway, it's one of those where... and also it's based on a story by the... what's his name? The famous French pervert. The...
oh my god.
Marquis de Sade.
Okay, thank you, because I was about to say, because you narrowed that down.
No, the Marquis de Sade wrote a story, and that's what it's based on. So that's one where, really, the top 10, I feel like it's almost like if you were going to make top 100 of just the most disgusting, disturbing movies, sure, but it's, I don't know, if it was going to be on this list, I would rather it be in the bottom. And oh boy, that's like a whole category I made notes on, is the why are they here thing. So Audition you don't know about. Audition is one of the best. So like the 2000s, I feel like was sort of the era of torture porn. That was like, you know,
that's like Hostel. Yeah.
That's what Audition is. Just so you know what it's about. It's a divorced man who's friends with a film producer. The film producer decides to put up a fake audition for actresses to get his friend like laid, essentially. And it turns out one of the actresses is completely insane, and she ends up, you know, kidnapping him. And there's a very famous scene where she takes a piano wire and slowly saws his legs off with the Achilles tendon first.
Okay. Oh, stop! Stop! That visual. That's like, that's one of those things that gets in my head.
Well,
okay.
and if you remember the poster is iconic. You see the woman; she's got the syringe, and she's like. So anyway, it's a good movie. It's one of those where you have to prepare yourself because it is going to be one of those kinds of movies. But it is one of the ones that was done well. So that's where I'm like torn on it, because I feel like if you're going to have a movie to represent that specific subgenre,
was that like the best one?
At least it's Audition, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, at least it's a good one. So I'm cool with it being in the top 10, but I'm also like, could something else have been there? And then Frankenstein, like I've got the largest chunk of this list is too low on the list, and I'm kind of like, because you and I sort of agree that Bride of Frankenstein we like a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like Bride of Frankenstein should be the one that's... I kind of also feel like that's the one that most people remember when they think of Frankenstein. I feel like a lot of the scenes that they draw from or stuff are actually from Bride of Frankenstein and not from Frankenstein.
Also, it's one of the ones, like, even if you're talking about, like... Because another question is, well, why is Frankenstein the one that's at the top 10 and not Dracula, Wolfman, The Mummy, etc.?
Right.
And even, like, if you want to argue, like, oh, well, it's Boris Karloff, he's the best actor out of all of those, you know, Universal monsters, it's not even the one where he gets to talk. That's Bride of Frankenstein or The Mummy. So, like, I feel like even if you're talking about Karloff's performance, it's not the best one to pick. So that's another one where, like, okay, it's good that, like, a Universal film is, like, in the top 10, but Frankenstein, instead of Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Wolfman, like, why Frankenstein specifically?
I really think they pulled that one because I think they wanted to represent somewhat the classic monster franchises. But I do think the reason they pulled that one is I feel like just they feel like the character itself is just so iconic, and you know that was the original film that he appeared in. I still think though, like you said, Bride of Frankenstein is just of the two, not even of all the monster movies, just of the two. Bride of Frankenstein is, I feel like, is the better and the more memorable of the two. Personally, I believe that of the original Universal movies, that The Invisible Man was my favorite out of all of those.
That's a good one too. Yeah, it's just one of those where, and this is another problem with these lists, because, you know, what's funny is every single movie we just mentioned is on the list. So, like, it gets almost silly when you care about the ranking. I feel like if it's just absurdly low, that's where it's kind of like, well, wait a second, why is this so low on the list? But, like, not getting too caught up on the ranking. Like, for instance, like, Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw, it's like, I'd rather Exorcist be number 1, but it's whatever, it's number 2. That's still pretty good. Like, they're pretty interchangeable. So that's pretty much my thoughts on the top 10. I will mention, like, one of my all-time favorite movies is number 11, the original Alien. That's something I would have probably plugged into the top 10, probably in Solo's place.
Alien. Alien's an interesting film for me. So I think I saw the first 3 when I was about 8 because
Jesus.
Well, my mom had left town and my dad just wanted to show us Alien. I saw it when I was 8 and I don't remember being scared of it at all. Ironically, I have this memory of me sitting on the couch with it on and working on my Pony Pals planner while it was on. Anyway, but I have never, until I kind of saw the poster, and it was only fairly recently that I kind of looked at it further, that I never really classified that. I mean, I guess I'm wrong. I never really classified that as horror. I kind of always put that as what's the word I'm looking for? I always just put that just in the sci-fi with horror, elements. You know what I mean? It's just like I feel like there's a lot of movies in this list that, because horror is such a broad term, it's such an umbrella term for like a lot of subgenres. I almost feel like they really kind of need to group, apples with apples, oranges with oranges, instead of putting apples and oranges together. Because I feel like there's so much going on, and it's very, very hard to weigh what makes one subgenre work or draw an audience as opposed to other ones, because I feel like you can agree with this is you've seen like probably more of these movies than I have, but I feel like there's certain ones that you tend to appeal to you more. Like for me, it's usually supernatural ones. I know you tend to like the slasher genre a lot more than I do, so I feel like you tend to lean more towards those. So I just kind of feel like that by Variety creating kind of just a blanket horror list, I almost feel like it's reductive.
Sort of. Like, so first of all, I will tell my Alien story. So the fact you saw it at 8 and wasn't scared is kind of funny. The first time I came in contact with it, so my dad collected comic books, and he had like a comic book room when we were kids, and like I remember I was in there and I was like looking through stuff. Somehow I got my hands on a copy of Batman versus Alien.
Oh my God.
That comic starts off with like a different retelling of Bruce Wayne's parents dying, where a chest burster bursts out of Thomas Wayne's chest. And I was just like horrified seeing that, and just like, what is this? And like my dad was like, oh, it's like this movie Alien and stuff. And it took a while for me. Like, I think I was like in middle school when I finally watched it, but I was so traumatized from that comic that I knew I was probably not going to be able to handle it. So, but I ended up loving it. Like, the first Alien movie I would say is horror. The second one I would say is more of an action movie. I think it works. Like, sci-fi horror is like technically Frankenstein is sci-fi horror.
That is true.
If you want to. So the thing is, like, it's horror, as you said, is a broad term. It's part of the reason I don't really get upset when people consider Jaws a horror film, because I consider it more of an adventure movie. But again, some people are really afraid of deep ocean, of sharks. So it's not really something that makes me afraid. And that's like the thing with horror too, is like it's very subjective what scares people. One of the scariest movies in the last few years to me was Free Solo,
Oh yeah.
I'm afraid of heights, so that movie scares the living hell out of me. But is it a horror movie? Not really.
Well, would you then say that horror is one of the most personal genres?
Absolutely, because even recently, like I was telling you, I really enjoyed Longlegs. We'll get more into that when we review all the movies at the end of the year. Yeah. But, a lot of people, partly because of that marketing campaign, went to see it, and they were like, this sucks, So it depends on what scares you, or, like, if you like slow-paced, or if you like, for instance, gore. Gore does nothing for me. I think it's gross. I think it's certainly disturbing, but is it scary? Not really. Not in the sense that, like, it makes me, like, afraid of going out or, like, going to sleep or whatever. But
what movie scares me that's not horror? Groundhog's Day.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I'd put that in the sci-fi horror too. Just that, I mean, like, even he gets like so depressed by it, he tries to kill himself. I'm just like, geez, this is so depressing.
So I'm going to run through, I listed a bunch of movies as potentially too low. I just thought it was kind of crazy how low they were. So I'm not going to dwell on these too much.
I have about 4 that I was suspicious of their rating, so I want to see if any of them come up in your list.
Yeah, so I did them in order. So first one is Silence of the Lambs at number 13. I was thinking maybe that should be in top 10 because it, best picture.
I will, and I have further notes on that too, but yes, I agree.
So yeah, Silence of the Lambs, top 10, most likely. Number 16, Halloween, also could be top 10 if you're wanting to rep the slasher genre. There really wasn't one there. Technically, I mean, Psycho was pre-slasher, but you could argue that's a good one. Shining, number 18, potential top 10. I really like it. It's a lot of people's personal favorites. Again, like the top 10's actually pretty well, because Exorcist covers the paranormal stuff, Psycho kind of slashers, Jaws monster movie, Rosemary's Baby, satanic stuff. Like, again, I can't be too mad at the top 10 because they seem to be covering their bases, but some of these I feel like are more, up there. Scream at 25, it looks like. And that's one I feel like a lot of people would say is the best slasher because it's also kind of parodying slashers. So that's weird. Dracula at 27. Bride of Frankenstein at 40. Really? Like that was...
Oh, God. That was criminal.
So, yeah, that not being in the top 10 is one thing, but that being all the way down at 4... And that, too, a bunch of these Universal are kind of low on the list. Because I think Dracula was the next one, and it was all the way down at 27 after Frankenstein was at number 8, so that's kind of weird. Bride of Frankenstein at 40. 47, Godzilla when King Kong was at 20. I feel like that's a little... weird. Like, I know that there was a big gap of time in between Godzilla and King Kong, but I would still say the special effects were pretty impressive in Godzilla, so I find it weird that it's so far down the list.
Yeah.
So Peeping Tom at 57, that's one a lot of people say is better than Psycho. I don't think that, but the fact that it came out before Psycho, it's an interesting one. It's one I'm sure you haven't seen, but it's like, it's interesting. It's a little... It came out right before Psycho, but it does a lot of very unique kind of things to it. So that's one. I prefer Psycho. Psycho's one of my all-time favorites, so not my opinion, but I feel like a lot of people seeing Peeping Tom at 57 would make them angry. The Sixth Sense at number 68 seems kind of low. Again, I know Shyamalan has fallen from grace many times, but that movie...
That's his magnum opus, basically. Though.
You cannot understand. Well, and the thing is, it holds up. If you watch it now, like, it's a very good movie. To the point where it makes you wonder what happened to him, like...
Right.
So, Creature from the Black Lagoon at 72. That's another one, big,
that was also just influential, too.
It's influential. It's one of, Guillermo del Toro, it's one of his favorite films, but it's also like it was showcasing the underwater camera at the time when that was a new invention. The costume was pretty good for the time. Like by now you probably wouldn't think it looks realistic, but I think it's got some interesting things about it. The throat will like swell when he's breathing. I don't know. For the amount of technology that it showcased at the time, I feel like it should at least be in the top 50. Nightmare on Elm Street at 74. That's another one where that literally built a film studio. New Line Cinema would not exist without this film.
Yep.
So 74, kind of crazy. The Omen at 79. Again, seems kind of low. I know you're not a big Omen fan.
But I've seen that one, so I'm allowed to have an opinion on it.
No, I got you. It's another one. Some people like it as much as things like The Exorcist or like Rosemary's Baby. I wouldn't say it's that good, but I don't know. I enjoy it quite a bit. So 79 seems kind of low. 81 for The Wolfman. Once again, seems kind of low, kind of crazy when, I don't know. It's an influential movie. Fun fact, way back, two fun facts I'll interject. One, way back when we started this podcast, T and I reviewed the Invisible Man remake that Lee Whannell directed. He's doing a Wolfman movie. It's coming out.
Oh, okay.
The Blumhouse Wolfman movie.
He's doing the Dark Universe then. basically.
Basically, he's doing it through Blumhouse, and it's like low budget horror, and he's doing like a new take on it. So, but check after we're done recording, check it out. It looks good. It's like just like that Invisible Man movie. It's like very small and like small cast and an interesting take on it. And the other kind of interjection, T and I were already kind of discussing some stuff for next year, and one of the films you were talking about reviewing next year, T, Dead of Night, is on this list.
I know. I thought that was low too.
Oh, that's a good point. I haven't seen it. Well, maybe I have seen it now that I think about it. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of a fun surprise once I looked at the list. Cat People at 93 was really low. That's another one. It's kind of a good story about immigrating into America and feeling sort of, almost cursed by your culture or something like that. I could go into it more if we were reviewing it. It's kind of low to be at 93. Dead Alive at 95. Really good horror comedy. One of the first films by Peter Jackson. The Haunting at 97. If you don't know what that is, it's sort of a cool supernatural film where it's like, are there ghosts or is the main character crazy? And it's very ambiguous. The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix is a modern retelling of it.
Right.
98, The Devil's Backbone.
Okay, that was criminally low. I thought that needed to be in the top half. That is such a beautiful just ghost story that touches on a lot of horror and trauma and all this sort of stuff. That one I was offended by, that it was 98.
Yeah, me too. I think that is another one that should at least be in the top 50. And then one of the movies we reviewed last year, Suspiria, was at 99. Yes.
I thought that was low. For me, it didn't need to be. I could see it like in the middle. It didn't need to be the top half, but I thought it should at least be at the middle.
Yeah, no, that's another one where it's like if it was like number 70 or something, I could understand. But at the very bottom of the list, especially, that's another one. No. Deep Red was on here. I was about to say there weren't any Giallo movies, and I'm like, oh, no, wait. They definitely had a few. Again, like with 100 movies, I can't be too upset with this list because a lot of their bases were covered. And then there's like, I only made notes on things that I thought were wrong. But there was a lot of cool inclusions, things like Eyes Without a Face and Freaks and like all these other movies that probably some people might not have even heard of. But were there any that I did not touch on that was on your list of things that were rated too low?
So a couple. One of them actually you did touch on, but I feel like what I'm going to say is be controversial. Personally, I thought The Birds was too high at 48. I kind of thought it should be in the lower half of the middle of the list because it's not even. I don't even think it's like one of his better movies. But I think it's kind of on there because of its pedigree. I feel like that's kind of more of a fun movie. Okay, you're gonna be upset. I thought The Shining was too high at 18. This is my thing. I like The Shining. I've seen it several times. My thing has always been, it's more.
I know you don't find it scary.
Well, I don't find it scary, but that besides the point. I always just as a movie itself, to me, it's more visually interesting than the story is interesting. Like, I feel like it's so visually interesting, it kind of gets in the way of having an interesting story. So that's kind of always been like one of my things. And I also kind of think it goes on for a while, but it does have, we did get some pretty iconic though horror scenes from that. So you kind of also have to factor that into, I'm very big onto like kind of what ends up seeping into pop culture. And so that does have to be acknowledged. I think I personally would have put it more down in like the 30s. That was my take. That was my controversial take on The Shining. I also said Suspiria was too low. Again, Devil's Backbone, criminally too low. The Babadook I thought was too low. I loved The Babadook, and it was at 66. And again, I would have put that in the top 30. So I guess maybe this is kind of what I think. I feel like if this list had come out, and I'll touch on why I think this later, come out like maybe 10 years ago. Hang on. Not 10 years ago. If it had come out, hang on, I'm trying to think of the years. Give me a second here. If it had come out like maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago, something around there, the Babadook would have been higher on the list. I kind of feel like people kind of more viewed it as, well, the excitement of the Babadook is past. And so that's why it's not as higher. I really think it's a really, really good movie about dealing with grief and trauma. And then the other one, I thought this was too high. I thought Get Out was too high at 20. I feel like I'm very much like, especially when you rank movies like this, or I kind of also sort of advocated this previously about the Academy Awards. There needs to be a cooling off period before you include it. You know what I mean? Because, like, for example, in the Catholic Church,
oh boy, here we go.
In the Catholic Church, I know, right? That this just sounds odd. I have a point where I'm going with this. In the Catholic Church, for someone to be canonized as a saint, there has to be a certain cooling off period, so that things like, immediate, emotional reaction or being caught up in the moment don't end up being factored in to someone becoming a saint. So that's why I'm kind of just like, I feel like there should almost, I feel like it's too new, it's too fresh, and people are still really high on it, and we haven't really seen how it's lasted out. So I personally thought was too high for right now. I would have put it lower. I would have put it in the top half of the bottom half of the list for right now. That's just me. But I thought that was too high. I really kind of would have swapped places with the Babadook and Get Out. Personally, that's just me. That's my take. When we talked earlier about things that we thought were missing. Actually, we haven't talked about that yet.
We haven't. That was going to be what I brought up. I will say, part of the reason I think Get Out is so high is it did win Best Original Screenplay when it came out, so it does have, the accolades. I do agree with you about the Babadook. I also agree that I think it's partly because, and I don't think I think the Babadook came out over 10 years ago at this point. I remember it came out when we were in college.
Yeah.
And that's been quite a while at this point. I feel like it was 2014. It might have been 2015. So maybe it was 9 years or, about to be 10 years ago. But no, I agree. If this had come out closer when that came out. Plus, there were some movies on this list that are very new. Things like Hereditary, which wouldn't exist 10 years ago. So there's things like that.
Right.
Get Out, I'm okay with being in the top 20. Babadook, I forgot how low it was, but that is definitely another one. But yes, missing. I'm going to throw out some of mine. I'm wondering if there'll be some crossover, but just off of the top of my head while I was looking at this, so there was Poltergeist.
Oh, yeah.
Not on the list. One thing I thought was really weird, so they had a couple of like the torture porn movies from the 2000s, like Audition. They didn't have Saw or the first Hostel. For some reason, they have Hostel Part 2. But they don't have, like, Saw is a really weird omission, because I feel like that was, like, the one that everyone saw because they could handle it. Like, Hostel was a little too intense for a lot of people, but I thought that was weird that they didn't have a lot of French Extremity films. They didn't have anything like Martyrs or High Tension, or, nothing. I feel like that's kind of a subgenre they didn't really cover. Wolf Creek. That was a huge movie when it came out. It's like a really good, like, it's kind of almost like a slasher film and a torture porn movie. Like, it's in this weird
again
sort of,
with the Achilles tendons. Jeez, I forgot about that scene.
Well, yeah, I guess so. But yeah, Wolf Creek's one. Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Oh my god, I forgot about that. Okay, that kind of should be on here, even though, like I've told you before, that's one I had to like turn that off like halfway, and like I need to go outside and touch grass or something.
Oh no, I'm with you. That one's one of the hardest watches. But again, why isn't it on the list? Friday the 13th. Like, thankfully they have Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, but I don't know, man. I feel like Jason Voorhees deserved a spot on here. Like, it did become kind of one of the biggest slasher franchises. And there was not... Maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, like, if you're listening to this on YouTube Music or something, I went through the list a couple of times. I don't think there's a single Vincent Price film.
Yes,
and
there
if
is.
I were to...
There is.
Which one?
House of
Which
Wax.
one? That's right. Okay. Well, it's not one of his best ones. The one that I was going to nominate was Just saying. I mean, it's not that great. It's kind of like it's a 3D movie. Like, there's so many good Vincent Price movies like based on Edgar Allan Poe works. Like the Mask of the Red Death could have been on this. But the one I was going to nominate was Dr. Phoebes or Dr. Phibes. I forget if you pronounce it, but so those were some of my omissions that I think are notable. But what about you, T?
Okay, so I have a shorter list than you do, but I feel like some of mine might be weird. First off, Fire in the Sky is missing.
Yeah.
Fire in the Sky.
Us possibly talking about that.
Yeah, Fire in the Sky is I think is a really, really good movie. I kind of think it would have been a great addition to this list because personally I think that as far as this gets a little weird and meta, but there's not a way for really the X-Files to be included on this list because there were some movies, but like the series is where TV horror kind of really got taken seriously, and that was almost kind of like a movie representation of the kind of stories on there. And so I kind of would have liked to seen it on that for that point alone, but just standing on its own, that's a very like disturbing movie because there really isn't, except for Alien, there really isn't many alien abduction sort of things or even like alien invasion things.
That's actually a good point. Shoot, and now I'm wondering if I forgot about it or if it was included on the list and I just didn't remember it. But Jacob's Ladder is another one.
I did not see that on there.
Yeah, that's another one. Not exactly an alien abduction movie, but that's sort of like a weird, surreal. Like, anyway, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. It's hard to classify. But yeah, no, that's a good point. There wasn't a lot of alien movies, period.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it. Because I'm sure someone could have probably argued like the 1950s War of the Worlds could have been on this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's actually a really good point now that I think about it. Not a lot of alien movies.
Besides
Alien.
The other one is there was no inclusion of, and maybe this is just my thing and maybe I'm an outlier in this, the Conjuring series. That's been like a really, really big, in my opinion, well done sort of trilogy. It's not a trilogy anymore because they're making a fourth one. They said the third one was to be the last one, but now they're making a fourth one. And it kind of spawned a whole universe, and it's kind of been the more successful of the recent horror franchises. We've had like Insidious and, like Lights Out and stuff like this, but the one I think that stands out the most is because to me, it's a horror, they're horror films, but I've kind of said this before. It's like one of my favorite love stories of like the last, couple decades, because the movies in their cases usually have a lot to do with what's going on in Ed and Lorraine's personal life. So I kind of think that should have been included on there because I actually think it's just really well done movies, especially the first two. The third one, I can kind of see what people would say, but at least somewhere in the first two, I think should have been included, one of those.
No, I think especially when like you could have included it in the bottom 50 if you didn't want to make it that high. But I agree. I think that one. Also, speaking of it being part of like pop culture, it was probably one of the biggest horror franchises of the 2010s.
Yeah.
I remember when the first one came out, it felt very refreshing, to be honest, because it was like a big tentpole horror franchise, but it felt new. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know it sounds weird to anyone who might be younger listening to this, but at the time it felt very refreshing. Especially like I think the thing that had just been like the big popcorn horror franchise was the Paranormal Activity movies.
Yeah,
like there was like a stint of found footage kind of being the big hot business for a while, and then right at the end of that, there was sort of a horror renaissance in the indie scene. You had some stuff like the Evil Dead remake and It Follows and stuff like that, and then on the bigger, more higher budget stuff, you had stuff like The Conjuring and a bunch of the movies you just listed. And The Conjuring, for me, the first one, I remember really feeling like it was kind of a magical experience seeing,
right?
Because it felt like I was watching
artistic. It felt artistic.
Like I was watching a new classic. It was like
exactly.
If I'd gone back in time to watch Poltergeist when it came out or something, like so. I'm with you on there. And so for the funniest segment, do you have any more?
Yeah, I have a couple more.
Okay, keep going.
So there's these two, and this is there was a lack of children's horror on here, which can be very influential in people's taste. So the two that I noted as missing, and maybe you'll disagree with they shouldn't be on the list, period. One of them is Nightmare Before Christmas, because if you're a child, that is a horror film. It just is. And then
I think that's funny when you say that you were not afraid of the first Alien film, but you think that was scary.
I know. I don't.
Because
I
I
had a
was
fear
not
of things
scared.
under my bed. I did not
As
make
like
it
a-
through the first scene.
As like a 3-year-old, I could watch Nightmare Before Christmas. I did not. Jack Skellington, those monsters. I know what you mean. The monster under the bed and stuff. Like, there were like monsters that kind of scared me, but I don't know. When you know that the monsters are just having fun on Halloween, they're not really all that scary. So that's funny. I do disagree a little bit, just because I wouldn't necessarily classify that as a horror movie. But keep going.
Second to the last one is Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. I don't know about you. That's kind of like a gateway horror film for like our generation.
It's so good.
I mean, that was like the first time they were real. The monsters were real this time.
I'm torn. I think there's a couple reasons why it wouldn't be included on the list, even though it is very good. One, it is animated. This list is very good about it's all live action, like no animated films, because there are like, non-children's horror films that could have been put on this that would have been. But actually, now that I think about it, both of those films are animated.
Yeah.
And then the other one with Scooby-Doo is like, I know that it doesn't matter, and frankly, if I was rating Zombie Island, it's good. It's like a 3.5 out of 4. But it is straight to video. Doesn't actually lower the quality whatsoever, but I do think that is probably something that,
like, you think if it had gotten a theatrical release, maybe it would have been taken a little more seriously.
I kind of wish it had gotten a theatrical release, because I bet it would have made a lot of money, to be honest. I'm sure it made a lot of money with the straight-to-video as well, because I'm pretty sure everyone I knew as a kid, I owned the VHS. I'm pretty sure everyone else did. The fact that everyone talks about it is one of those movies that scared the crap out of them as a kid. I relate to it quite a bit, and I have a feeling must have made quite a bit more money.
Like I said, it's a horror gateway film. It really is. And then it
was scary.
My last one is, and now this one's controversial with myself. How do you feel about this? Rebecca, the original.
It's spooky, but it's not horror. It's also like,
really, she's living with a guy she thinks is a killer, and with this ghost of a woman that's following her around, and then there's the creepy, caretaker lady, Mrs. Danvers.
I think the problem is it's not categorized as horror, so that's that. Also, it's one of those where I feel like it's more like romantic drama. It's got some spooky undertones to it, but at no point was I thinking anyone was going to get murdered when I was watching it.
So murder or some type of violence is necessary for your horror ranking. I'm just trying to understand.
Well, you said this one was controversial for yourself.
Well, controversial because I personally classify it as a thriller.
Okay.
And I had actually made a list of movies that I thought shouldn't be on this list. And there was a whole bunch of them that I called thrillers. Them being Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Silence of the Lambs, Manhunter, Night of the Hunter, and then if Rebecca had been on there, I would have put Rebecca on here too. I don't classify any of those as horror in my book. To me, those are all. Oh, I just hit my microphone. That'll be fun to edit out. For me, those are all thrillers. And to me, that's like a totally separate feeling.
Technically, I would say thrillers and psychological thrillers are like a subgenre. So they are like horror, but they're like their own section of the pie. You know what I mean? Because that's another one too, where Silence of the Lambs, I was very on it's a horror movie train when I was a kid, but now it kind of reminds me of like it's more of like a crime movie.
Yeah.
The fact it just happens to be very scary, but it's another one of it's like Jaws. You know what I mean? Like some people find it way scarier than other people, and it is horrific content. The same thing, like Night of the Hunter is one of my all-time favorite films. That being said, I am kind of on the fence of it being a horror or not a horror movie. I agree with you with it being a thriller. But at the same time, there is something very gut-wrenchingly scary about kids being chased by a murderer and no one believes them. Like, so I feel you, but I guess I would argue that it's just a subgenre, the same as like slashers or paranormal or torture or what, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a thriller. Because, I mean, that's, speaking of which, like, Get Out is kind of a thriller as well, you know? There's no necessary, you know, it gets a little wacky with, like, people's brains being swapped and whatnot, but...
Actually, I forgot to mention, one other one that's missing from this one, in my opinion, Threads is missing from this one. I don't know if you've ever seen Threads.
I'm trying to, it sounds familiar. Why, I'm wondering if I'm having an embarrassing mind blank right now.
Well, because I think it's one I've recommended twice for the last 2 years because I didn't know if we had a theme yet for Halloween. I think I pushed it again for next year, but then we already had remember we talked about this. It's the one with the guy. Sure I've sent you a picture of it, of the poster. It's like the guy with like the bandage like over his face with the eye holes cut out. You're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That one's missing. And then finally, I don't know if you read the discussion below the list of any of this. But
let me chime in a little bit here. I had also a section called "Why Are They Here?"
Okay, go on.
So here's a few of mine. Planet Terror. I like this movie, but this is what. This is the film equivalent of a shitpost. This is Robert Rodriguez like having fun with his friend Quentin Tarantino. Like, they're not taking it seriously. It is not a serious movie. So why the hell is Planet Terror from Grindhouse on this list? Again,
wait, so is this more of a comedy? Movie.
It's not. It kind of is. Like, it's one of those I've thought again about talking about on this show. It's sort of a zombie movie, but it's also, like, stupid on purpose. You know what I mean? It basically is a horror comedy.
Yeah.
But it's hard to explain, because it's not, like, it's not the same as, like, Evil Dead or something. It has some, like, overtly stupid moments on purpose. It's just weird. Like, and you could argue, like, well, Evil Dead 2 is on this. Well, Evil Dead 2, like... It's different. I don't know.
It feels more overt.
This was just like him having fun. This was not intended to be like a serious movie. Not that Evil Dead was either, but Evil Dead was like an earnest attempt. You know, like, I don't know. Planet Terror, I feel like anything that it was doing had been done better by other movies on the list. I like it just fine, but it did not need to be on here. Next one, Hostel Part 2. I already touched on this.
Yeah.
Why Part 2? If you're gonna have one of the Hostel movies on this, why not Part 1? I didn't read the blurb underneath, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the B story, which is really good in Hostel Part 2, but no. Like, frankly, it was panned. It was critically panned when it came out. I don't know how it ended up on this list. I remember critics thought it sucked, so I don't know why that's going on.
That note just made my night.
Blood for Dracula. This is an Andy Warhol, basically, like, it's an erotic cult version of Dracula. So it's porn. Like, it's porn, but it's also weird. I remember seeing this on, like, That Guy with the Glasses when I was in, like, middle school. I think it was Brows Held High was the one who reviewed it, but it's a weird, like, art house so bad it's good movie, so I don't know why it's on here. And then the horror of Dracula. So Hammer is a British studio that did a bunch of basically their own version of, like, Universal monsters, like Dracula, Frankenstein, etc., etc. But their whole shtick was like, we're gonna make it really ultra violent, and we're gonna have boobs, and we're gonna have blood and stuff. So I'm not opposed to there being a Hammer film on here. I'm just confused as to why it is just the first Dracula movie. Like, I feel like, because these are also, like, this is how oh my goodness, what's his name? A bunch of big actors got big from these Hammer films.
Yeah.
One of which was Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars. He was Frankenstein in the Hammer films. and I'm blanking on his name because I've been at work all day, but it's Saruman from Lord of the Rings was Dracula in The Horror of Dracula. So I'm not opposed to it being on the list. I just find it weird that it's just one Hammer film and it's this specific one.
Right.
And then the grand finale of why the hell is this on the list? The Human Centipede Part 2.
Oh, God.
There have been 3 movies that have made me so sick I nearly left the theater, and this is one of them. This is such a bad movie, and what's a travesty is that it has such a genius premise. The idea of this is that it's about a crazy person who is obsessed with the original Human Centipede, so it's like a sequel that takes place outside of the universe of the first movie. And that was such a cool concept that it sold me on the film, and I went to see it. And my God, anyone who thinks the Human Centipede is bad, grab a barf bag and watch this movie. It's awful. It's so bad. I don't know why it is on this list. And I almost missed it. But Event Horizon. This is the guy that would go on to do the Resident Evil movies. A lot of people really like Event Horizon. I'm not one of them. I think it's a neat idea, but I think it's just very schlocky. So those are my why are they even on this list?
And then I guess the few that I get that I said that I classified as thrillers, I was like, why are these here? And I guess the ones that I also said we found out were you and I classify as adventure films. I was like, why are they here? But we've discussed, why they may show up. What was interesting is one that's gotten a lot of praise in like the last 5 years or so is Midsummer. We've talked about Midsummer. I haven't seen Midsummer, but there was a big discussion about it in the comment section of this article. There was like people going on and on about it, and then the people were discussing whether or not it really was a good for her movie or something like this. And then somebody was like, well, why isn't it on here? And I love this person said, well, Wicker Man's on here, and that's the better of the two. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think? I'm sure you've seen both.
Hereditary's on the list. I'm okay with that. I kind of agree. As mean as it is, because I like Midsummer, I think it's a really good movie. I think it's very reductive to just compare it to Wicker Man. But Wicker Man is the better of the films. Sorry. But that being said, again, there's a bunch of films that it's like, why are they on here to begin with? And even just, Midsummer is one that could have been added to the missing. Like, I listed a whole bunch that it's like, where are they? You listed a few. That's the thing with these lists. And this goes back to people who like to quote AFI. This is like people who like to talk about different publications and whether their films deserve to be recognized as true arts because some critic somewhere wrote that it was the 3rd best scatological comedy of the 1990s. Like, who cares? It's all relative, it's all stupid, and everybody always gets mad at these lists. But they're very fun to talk about. And Variety, honestly, they do a pretty good job. This is kind of on par with their animated TV show list, because that also had a lot of very hot takes, a lot of omissions, a lot of why is this ranked where it is.
Right.
Almost to the point where you wonder, are they doing it on purpose? Are they making us mad on purpose?
Right. Well, I will say that
they know that they'll get a lot more people reading if they make us mad.
It's rage bait. That's what it is. It's rage bait.
But yeah, I will say, though, and it's hard to even be that mad. Again, the top 10 are pretty solid. The only ones I'd probably replace and put lower are Audition and Solo. Solo is another one that's like borderline, why is this on this list at all? But I
put that on like that's a perv movie list. That's not really a horror movie list.
There's like 80 movies that we didn't even talk about because they weren't ranked at a bad level or whatever. Like, there's a whole bunch of movies that are covered on this list that deserve to be on this list, and I feel like that's the important thing. I think they got a good broad swath of the genre, and I think that is pretty fair. There's a lot of hot takes, but overall, solid list. But those are my thoughts on what I think could be better, in my opinion.
Well, the good news is I walked away from this list with I have now a list of 17 titles that I want to watch after reading about them.
There you go.
So that's good. Unfortunately, the first one list was House of Wax, which you gave a glowing review to. I've been excited to see that for years, and you were just like, "That's not even his best movie." And I was just like, "Okay."
It's got some, like, I feel like you'll like it. It's very, and also I know you own a copy of Wicker Man. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
I haven't because I was going to, but then people were like, it's really disturbing. And I was like, oh, I kind of bought it because the case was really pretty.
It is disturbing, but it's also, I think you'll be able to handle it. Like, again, check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay. But I think, without further ado, we should get into the worm meat of the show.
Yes, the worm meat. But discussing the top 100 horror films of all time was a great way to kick off the Halloween episode. That being said, Whiskey, what are you drinking this evening?
So, fall for me is like a good cider month.
Yeah, of course.
It's a very... So I am being a bit bougie with some Golden State cider. Brewed in Sonoma County, California, and I've got the Mighty Dry here.
Mighty Dry.
The Mighty Dry. There was a Brut version, and there was a Mighty Dry. I went with the Mighty Dry.
But the Brut's the one... Oh, yeah, that sounded so fresh, though.
It did.
Like, that just...
It was. But what...
That sounded refreshing. So I'm having a cocktail called the Gummy Worm. Tastier than it probably looks in the movie. Than the worms look in the movie. Cranberry juice, raspberry vodka, sour mix, and some apple schnapps. Really good. I'm enjoying this. I tend to like fruitier cocktails, which I don't know why people put down fruity cocktails and they'll be like, yeah, I need to have my beer. I don't do fruity cocktails, which a lot of time the fruity cocktails are stronger than the beer. So all that tells me is you can't handle your liquor when people put down fruity cocktails.
The only men who care about that anymore are the ones who are very, very insecure with their sexuality. I like beer just fine.
And they're still boycotting Bud Light.
No, dude, they have no backbone. They stopped that like a month after it happened. Well, not only that, so like that comedian, what's his face, and he's fine. He's right wing people like him because he's quote unquote like edgy or whatever, but he's not politically aligned.
I know the guy. Was he the one that was fired from SNL?
Yeah, he did a Bud Light commercial.
Yeah, I just saw it. Yeah,
apparently going over really well. No, and he's funny. I watched his special. Anyway, let's get into the movie.
Okay, back. So obviously, gummy worms, worm meat. This is your wake up call. All signs point to Tremors. This was a fun pairing to go with our gruesome twosomes. I kind of tweaked Whiskey's original idea for the month. It's still horror comedies, but both of them, as I said, featured idiots. Buddies in the main character role, idiot buddies in the main character roles, who become the unlikely heroes. But yeah, Tremors, as you know, is it's a major cult classic. So to get into the brass tacks here. So the cast of this movie, Tremors, 1990. Val is played by Kevin Bacon. Earl by Fred Ward, who I actually read, I think just passed away 2 years ago. Rhonda was by Finn Carter. Bert was Michael Gross. Heather was Reba McEntire. She was fun to see. I forgot she was in this. Melvin was Bobby Jacoby. Nancy was Charlotte Stewart. Mindy was Ariana Richards. Miguel was Tony Gennaro. And Walter was Victor Wong. There are some other people in here, but I kind of just went with the mains. Actually, this is almost the entire cast. I think there's like 4 people I didn't include. But this is directed by Ron Underwood. He's done a lot of TV stuff. Things you've seen, things I've seen. After this, though, he did do City Slickers. This was written by S.S. Wilson and Brent Maddock. So they also wrote together Short Circuit and Batteries Not Included. It looks like S.S. Wilson, Brent Maddock, and a couple of other people. I forget if Ron Underwood was involved or not. I don't think he was. Went on to form the Stampede Pictures or Stampede Productions. Obviously a reference to the Stampede in this. Cinematography was by Alexander. Oh, his last name. Grusinowski. He also did he's on a bunch of cinematography, but he did like the notable titles include The Craft, a few of the Medea films, and a childhood favorite of mine, Nancy Drew. The budget of this movie was, according to Wikipedia, 6.4 to 10 million, and its box office was only 16.7 million. So according to Wikipedia, according to a interview that Kevin Bacon did, he said the film only made a fifth of what Universal expected. So that Universal did consider this film a flop. And then I was wondering, of course, why was this a flop? If it's like it's a movie everybody's seen, and it has a huge following, a huge devoted fan base. It's kind of in its own way iconic, probably because of Dune, as we talked about earlier. But it says that much like a previous movie we talked about, I don't remember which one it was, this was huge on the home video market, back when they still used to publish, best-selling titles and things like that, top rented, all that fun stuff. This was huge on that, and that's how a lot of people ended up seeing this. But this was also put out in January of 1990. I don't know if this is the case back then or if it's still the case now, but at one point, I think you and I at least were told that January was kind of where the studios dump, some of the movies they don't expect, to be a big deal. So I'm also kind of wondering why Universal was like, oh, this didn't make as much as we thought. I also just think that putting movies out in January is a bad move just because it's after the holidays. People are cutting like anything unnecessary out that they can. They have TV for free. But the good news, though, is it seems like it was liked critically for its throwback to 50s monster flicks. It seemed to be a recurring theme amongst the reviews that were quoted about it. They seemed to like its references. They liked, the small town vibe, all this stuff that showed up in these classic 50s monster films. There were a few detractors, but for the most part, it was critically liked. I believe at Rotten Tomatoes, it sits at an 88%. So Whiskey, that being said, you've seen this film before because when I mentioned it, you were like, oh yeah, that one. Yeah, I've seen that. What was your first impressions, I guess, when you saw it?
Everybody's seen this. Well, first impressions, I would have to go back in time because this is when obviously like the rental market had something to do with why everyone's seen this despite the bad box office. But the other reason is this is one that was on TV all the time.
Yep.
It probably still is. If anyone has cable out there, I'm sure if you flip to a channel, there's probably showing Tremors right now. But it had been in quite a while since I'd seen this. This is one that I'd seen plenty of times on TV, but I can't remember the last time I sat down and watched from beginning to end. And one thing, I think probably the biggest impression it made on me this time is I forgot how solid the script was. This is like a screenplay with no fat on it. It gets right into the action. I was expecting to not see any like worm related stuff for like 30 minutes, but already like minutes into the movie, they're already foreshadowing what's going to happen. They're already hinting at the whole noise sound, like, noise summoning them. There's already kind of a bit of the worms patrolling. There's that Jaws POV shot of like them coming up on people.
Yep.
There's no wasted time. Every scene is you're learning something about the characters, even just little things like when the new geologist or seismologist or whatever, it's like, oh, they said they were going to send a girl next time, and that kind of clues you into Kevin Bacon being a bit of a ladies' man.
Yeah.
And just idle chatter. Like, there's no dialogue in this movie that isn't useful later on or doesn't at least clue you into aspects of the characters. It's writing this is like one of those scripts. Every so often I'll bring this up. Like, if any aspiring screenwriters who listen to this show, watch this movie. This is like a great way. There's no crap to cut out of this script. And that's why it's like probably a tight 90 minutes. Like, it's just all fun. They get right into the worms as soon as they can, and they get out as soon as they know that they've,
nothing. It doesn't overstay its welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it sounded like had not seen this before we watched this, or at least that's the impression I got when we were still discussing.
Like you, I had to be reminded that I'd seen this movie. And I mean, you'd seen this movie. You knew you'd seen this movie. I had to be reminded I'd seen this movie. And again, I was watching and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. It's something I hadn't seen in probably like 20 years or something like that. But so there was but it was fun. It was kind of almost like I got to see it again for the first time. You know, kind of like what we talked about with, oh my God, with Paper Moon, when I remember I told you, I was like, oh, I've seen this movie before. I remember this ending. And I was like, that dumb girl. But it was kind of the same. It was kind of like the same thing here where I was like, oh yeah, I remember this now. But I didn't realize it was like back in there. For some reason, I thought it was the late 90s. Again, it was like the early 90s, 1990. What you said, exactly what you said is about the script. It's very tight. There's not extra stuff. You get into it. Nothing's introduced that doesn't come back. Everything, I mean, except for it being, giant worm monsters living underground, obviously. Everything, like their actions and everything is believable. I wasn't at any point being like, this is stupid. Why are you doing this? This is stupid. I hate that. I hate that in like, in certain genres of the horror franchise. I hate when it's just like, this is so obviously stupid. I like though that the big thing for me is that people were behaving intelligently or as best as you could with an underground monster crisis. Like there's only like so much you can do. And one of the things I like is, it's the monsters are creepy, but it didn't get gross. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like there was a lot of room for this to easily become kind of a gross out thing. And it didn't take that route, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, I thought this was I do think this is very fun. I do think it's very well written. And I do think it's very well edited too. I probably should have put who the editor was on here.
Yeah, they knew their audience. Part of the reason it doesn't get gross is because they wanted this to be... It's funny, we spent a good chunk of the first part of this show talking about the adventure genre or whatever, like Jaws and stuff. And that's kind of where this neatly fits in, because there are deaths, there are dead bodies, some people get eaten by worms, but yeah, it doesn't get like super gruesome because who would that appeal to? Like the premise would be too goofy for like the gore hounds to really take seriously, and then you scare away all the like 13-year-old boys who would want to see this if you make it too scary. Right. So they knew what they were doing, and it does get gross, but like worm gross,
Yeah.
With that, and that's kind of where it's fun too, especially with that final charging off the cliff explosion, which I almost feel like might even be a homage to Duel. I don't know if you've seen that, the Spielberg film where it ends with the truck going off the cliff. I don't know.
Wait. Actually, I think we've discussed Duel before. Okay. It might be an homage to that, but I was like, you just unlocked something in my mind. I feel like we had a big discussion about Duel at some point by Steven Spielberg. But go on.
We might have. I don't know if you've even seen Duel, but yeah, that's like a big... It's the iconic ending of that movie, and there's even a little bit of a homage to it in Jaws. He uses some of the sound effects when the shark dies from when the truck goes over, but that's what that reminded me of. But yeah, it's not trying to be gross out. It's very fun. Also, not a whole lot of people die. There's like a couple of deaths, a couple of people get eaten. Frankly, I think the most disturbing death is that first one that doesn't even happen before, like, it happens before the movie starts. The town drunk, they find up a pole, and he died of dehydration because the worm was waiting for him to come down.
Right.
And it's like one of those things where it's, foreshadowing what...
It's foreshadowing the end, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, it's one of those where when you first see the movie, you're kind of like, that's so weird, I wonder what happened. But, if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what happened. But I feel like that's, like, one of the most... Like, even just the fact, knowing that the worms waited for him that long for him to just, dehydrate, shows that they sit there for a while, like, which happens later in the movie, where it's like, it's been, like, 30 minutes. Do you think they've gone? And then they test it, and then the little things come out.
Yep.
And speaking of it, like, this is also a really good example of, I've mentioned this before, but like if you're doing monster or like paranormal movies or like anything where there's something kind of unusual, you need to explain the rules. And this is another movie that does that really well, because these are a weird worm monster, and it's like, how do they hunt? How do they know where you are? How do they eat people? What are they able to do? Can they get me if I'm here? You know, like, and this is one of those things that you gradually learn over the course of the movie. There's bits like where their car gets stuck, and then, you know, they drive into town, and oh my god, what's that stuck under your car? And one of the
little tongue monster things is,
yeah, like it's stuck to his car. So you see, oh, they can grab your car with that, but they're not quite strong enough. Like if you have a good enough car, you can kind of pull away, because then later on in the film you see them actually pull a car into the ground. So it's like, and that too, like for a while, you talk about like people not doing anything stupid. There's a couple of exceptions. There's Melvin, because he's a shithead. And then there's the little girl, because she's a little girl and she doesn't know any better. But then there's also, like, you could argue, like, there's quite a bit of them just standing inside of the general store. But you could argue, like, at what point can the worms not get you? You know? And eventually they find out, oh no, they can get us in here.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like things like that, where I would not say that they're being stupid, but it's kind of like, why would they assume that they are unsafe at this point when they haven't gotten them yet?
Well, I guess like by stupid, what I meant is, you know, it wasn't like in that Geico commercial where they're like, instead of driving off and leaving, let's go and hide in the knives and axe barn. You know, it wasn't like that. It's a
problem specifically with the horror genre, because it's a tough thing to manage. It's one of those things that's very easy to heckle when you're going, but if you're sitting down and writing a horror movie, it's one of the hardest things to pull off, is how do you make the plot go forward without someone doing something stupid? And a lot of the more schlocky, you know, this applies to the slasher genre, because a lot of them, they didn't care, because, you know, no one cared. It was just, oh, teenagers are going to a movie to make out with their date. You know, no one's paying close attention. But, like, if you're trying to write, like, a genuinely good movie, you need to find a way to make them do something stupid, but have it be excusable, or at least make sense. Like, why would you...
Well, and I think
I don't want to talk about long legs. There's like a point of I saw it with someone who was kind of trying to argue that Micah Monroe's character was doing something stupid in the movie, and I was arguing like, well, why would she think that she's in any? First off, she's a freaking FBI agent, and she has a gun on her. Like, why is her going out to investigate something being stupid?
Yeah,
when she has a gun and she has it drawn. So like, it's things like that where like some people might be like, oh, they're being stupid. And I know what you're talking about, because there are definitely, like, that Geico commercial. There's plenty of, like, great examples. But this is a good example of teaching you the rules in a set, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? The stakes keep getting raised higher and higher. Like, by the end of the movie, they have to be, like, on rocks. You know, they can't even be on the roofs of buildings. Like, the worms are smart enough now that they're just demolishing the buildings. They know how to get them.
You know what, that was, I think, the part where it kind of became scary, is because I feel like a lot of times with just like creature features like this would be, you know, usually they're just, you know, either unstoppable or something like that, and that's the whole thing. But what I think to me kind of really upped the scare factor here, I mean, like, I wasn't like hiding under my couch or anything, but it was kind of unsettling, is the fact that they are learning, you know, because like that kind of undermines some basic security that we have as humans. Is, you know, we kind of believe, you know, we're at the top of the food chain because we have the intelligence to make stuff happen that they don't understand. But the fact these creatures were learning, adapting, and figuring out how best, that to me was very unsettling. And so I thought that was well done. But like you said, I think one of the things this movie does very well, like you said, because there really wasn't a lot of stupidity to move the plot forward, is I think it's because they were very careful with their pacing, and because they had the creatures learning is what moved the plot forward. That's what caused them to change and move, because a lot of time they were just trying to figure out how to get out of the town because they couldn't get out. But then they realized there's really only one thing to do because these creatures are learning and because they figured out certain things they can't say, they're not safe. It's a whole thing. But I really thought that was well done and is what really makes the pacing in this film work so well. Because I wouldn't say there's even any slow spots in this movie. Because I do think like a lot of horror films will have like, like they always have like some sort of something somewhere where it's like, yeah, that was a little slow there. And this was really good as far as keeping the pacing going. And like I said, like the fact that the creatures were learning is really disturbing, especially at the very end, like how fast they learn. Like, okay, I saw what happened to that one. That's not going to happen to me this time.
Well, and also them setting a trap. That's like next level intelligence, because that's like the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah,
like that's the cavern part where they're like, you know, clever girl Velociraptor. Well, and that too, that's a crazy thing. This predates Clever Girl because this was before Jurassic Park. But which that was something I also wanted to touch on that was really fun watching this. This is kind of the last bastion of like an era of filmmaking, because this was the year before Terminator 2 came out, and then a few years after that we would have Jurassic Park. So, you know, I've talked before on the show how I'm a big fan of practical effects, and all of the special effects in this film are very old school. Like even stuff like the bit where Bert and his wife are just unloading all of their guns into one of the graboids that's come into their basement. That's literally it's a hand puppet.
I love that.
So it's a miniature set where they're like super, it's just classic filmmaking. It's forced perspective. It's a miniature set with a hand puppet coming through a fake wall, and then, you know, squids exploding on the hand puppet, and things like when the tongues come out, the tongue monsters, it's just a reverse shot. Like it's one of those things where the real shot is like them pulling it back into the mouth, but they reverse it so it looks like they're coming out. It's just all old school film techniques from before CGI. So it's very fun watching this movie, and it feels like the last gasp of like that era of filmmaking before computers took everything over, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it feels very quaint. And it is kind of funny that this is a Universal film when I mentioned
with Universal monsters.
Jurassic Park. Yeah, like this is, and that too, I think this is also the same year that Back to the Future 3 came out. Like they were having a time. And you know what else is interesting? And I don't know if you even remember this, but like speaking of this being quote unquote a flop, Universal put out multiple sequels.
Yes, I was gonna get that. I was gonna get to that. So this movie ended up having 5 direct-to-video sequels. And then it did have a TV series for a season on Sci-Fi.
That's right.
I think I read that Blumhouse, Sci-Fi ordered another series fairly recently from Blumhouse that was made that they ended up passing on, and a bunch of other networks ended up passing on. So my guess is it wasn't that good. And actually, so Blumhouse went ahead and produced that second series, and S.S. Wilson and Brent Maddock, you know, basically the writers of this original, you know, movie and everything, who did create Stampede Pictures or Stampede Productions, I forget what it's called, were not given any creative control, so they actually declined executive producer credit on this because they were like, you know, if you're not going to let us, they're like, we don't want to be non-writing producers. You know, this is our kind of baby, you know, whatever. We're not signing off. And well, the show hasn't gone anywhere. So take that as you will. But what's interesting about, you talked about the practical effects in this, the worm, this is kind of a funny thing. The worm actually underwent a redesign during filming, because it originally was supposed to have a hard shell that sort of opened up and the worm would come out. I mean, it's similar. It's kind of, but I guess the way it looked, a lot of the crew literally thought it looked like a penis with a foreskin being pulled back. They decided to do a redesign of the monster, of the worms, during the filming, which must have been fun. But I'm just like, who did not? I don't know. It's like one of these things where it's like, you feel like you would have seen that on paper before, you know, you brought it to life. But
Well, I mentioned, we mentioned, and I mentioned before recording, like, anyone who's listened to the show knows or might suspect that I'm a bit of a Dune fan. But
yes.
these worms are scarier than Shai Hulud because Shai Hulud is not very smart, and also, if you're taking inspiration from something that already exists, like a sandworm, speaking of that redesign, this one is very iconic. It's very unique. Like, you're not gonna mistake this sandworm with the sandworms from Dune.
Right.
And part of it probably was from that redesign because it does have that beak. It has those freaky tentacle tongue things that come out.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if they were part of the original design. But good. It certainly sets it apart from other sandworms.
Well, you know what its beak sort of reminds me of? It reminds me sort of like the eggs from Alien. Because they would kind of like break open like that. I don't know. Like, I don't know if you kind of know what I'm talking about. Like in points, I don't know. The beak kind of reminds. So it was kind of almost like an amalgamation, of different sort of like sci-fi creatures we've seen before, sci-fi monsters we've seen before. But I did not know though that everything was practical. I did read though that at the end when the thing falls off the cliff and explodes, that was done in a parking lot with miniatures. So
you'd have to do that with miniatures. There's no way you're gonna have full size.
But I did know. I know, but I'm just like, it was still. But it'd still be pretty big if they did do that in a parking lot, though. It may not have been, the size of like, 30 feet long.
Oh yeah, it would have probably been the size of like me, or like maybe like a car at the largest or something. But it's not. Yeah, like it.
So it said
all of it. Frankly, all of these, like if you're thinking of it from the special effects perspective, there's a lot of scenes in this where you can kind of tell that the worms and the actors are not in the same spot, or like it's like a cutaway, or it's like superimposed or something. So a lot of the worm action is just puppetry. Like I mentioned the shooting scene, that was literally a hand puppet, and it's kind of the same thing because you notice when they cut to the worms, it's usually a closer shot. So it's likely it's just like a small puppet, but they make it look bigger by doing that, and then they'll,
when you bring that up, what's funny is if you watch this movie closely, there are a few scenes where I like to call where you can see the practical effects happening or evidence of the practical effects. The first one that I saw, I don't know if you saw this, was when they're riding their horses, they get thrown off their horses, and then one of the horses gets attacked by the worm. Well, if you watch that scene closely, you can see where the wires are, or rope, or whatever it is that's kind of holding the horse in position while it's doing its struggling thing, while the worm is moving around it and stuff like that. So there was that one, and then I don't remember what has happening in the scene, but there was a scene where Val and Earl where wait, hold on. Did I say their names right? Please tell me I said their names. Yes, Val and Earl. I don't know why I thought that was wrong for a second. But Val and Earl, they're standing, and then the worm pops out of the ground. Well, when it pops out of the ground, it's like from an above shot. You can see where Val and Earl were standing, that they were standing on top of some board or something that had been covered with dirt, I think, obviously, so that wouldn't get, I don't know what, but it was funny to watch. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I almost kind of think that's like a nice callback to, the 1950s monster movies with the obviously, fake effects and stuff. It was done practically, but, it doesn't look real. So I don't think that was on purpose, but I also don't think that I fault the film for it, if you know what I mean.
I do.
So with that being said, so there was, we talked previously about the iconic SpongeBob worm, I think either during this or before this. So they actually pointed out in the Wikipedia article that the ending of that episode is a reference to the end of this movie, because like the previous one, the worm goes off the cliff, except in SpongeBob, it doesn't explode. It just goes, ouch.
Yeah.
But that's a reference to this. They said, though, that what is his name again? The writer, S.S. Wilson, got the idea for this because he was in the Navy and was stationed at some Nevada desert base. And that's kind of where the whole idea of these underground worms and tremors and stuff come from. So I thought that was interesting. But I'm just trying to understand though, why though this only became a hit though on direct to video. You know what I mean? I feel like I don't understand why this didn't become big on the screen. Because I feel like some sort of monsters think this looks better on the screen.
I think you hit it on the head when you talked about when it was released. I didn't know this was released in January, and since this is your movie, I didn't do any of the research. But the second, because I've always wondered that too. I, in fact, was kind of going into this review being like, did it bomb though? Like, it's one of those, everyone loves this movie. I don't think I've ever met, there's some people, myself included, who wouldn't say it's one of their all-time favorites or something, but no one dislikes this movie. So exactly, like, why would this bomb? But now that I know that they dumped it in January, that's why it bombed. Like you said, like, no one's going to the movies, especially like, nowadays things are kind of different. You can find things on demand. Right. The internet exists, yada yada. Like, if in that too, like, because the internet exists, like, let's say this came out nowadays, like, there could be a chance, like, maybe word of mouth would get people to go see it. And even today, one of our earlier mini segments, we were talking about bombs that were happening this year that were really good movies that we encouraged people to go seek out. But I think January killed it to the point where I do wonder, like, Universal, why did you expect it to do better if you dumped it in like the trash month?
Well, that, and also this to me just feels like, when you're watching it, almost like a summer blockbuster. Maybe not even a blockbuster, but definitely a summer movie. The
poster is iconic.
Yeah.
Years before I saw this movie, I'd seen that poster everywhere as a kid. Like, it looks. It's so good you could almost argue it's a bad poster because the graboid looks cooler on the poster than it does in the movie. So like, but yeah, it is one of those baffling things. But I think that's why. And also movies back in the day, I mean, if they were not making money, they'd be gone pretty quickly.
That's true.
The life cycle of movies is. Someone else was talking about this. It might have even been Redler Media, but. It reminded me of a core memory because, man, you and I, we probably remember, like, there used to be dollar theaters.
Yes.
Because there were different kinds of movie theaters, ladies and gentlemen. If you're a young person watching this, for instance, Monsters Inc. I saw that at a cheap theater because I saw it like a month after it came out. Like, back in the day, if you missed a movie during its initial screening, it would be gone from the big theaters, and then it would be put in like a crappier theater. And then after it ran its time at that theater, it would go to an even crappier theater until it was like, and then it would like basically be gone for like 6 months to a year before it was even released on VHS. So
wow.
We're really spoiled these days because now it's like you see a trailer for a movie and a month later it's in theaters.
Yeah. There's not as much of the anticipation.
It's already on Blu-ray or on digital. So like, it's crazy, the life cycle of movies. But yeah, like,
I have a funny story about dollar theaters. As I've told you, my mother used to work for a theater chain on the corporate level, and she told me about, there was a time when it was when Pretty Woman had come out, and it was a huge success. And so, like you said, per the usual life cycle, once it had died out of the theaters, it was going to go to the dollar house in the chain. Well, Disney decided, because it was so big a movie, they wanted a bigger cut of the dollar house revenue or something like that. So my mom's theater chain, being petty, was like, fine. Well, they argued, but they were finally just like, fine. But then they ended up just selling like the tickets for like 58 cents or something like that, just to be petty. So they still got, their 3/4 of the profit, but it wasn't what they were expecting. So that's a fun little thing. But yeah, dollar theaters, that was a throwback. There used to be a theater in town that it was the biggest theater in town. So we would usually go to see movies that hadn't quite hit the dollar theater yet, but because the theater was so overly large, movies would stay there longer because they had more screens to fill. So That was fun. But so we talked about that. We talked about the sequels and everything. So this was interesting. This popped up and this was bizarre because this I didn't come across this at all, and I want to see what you think. So Bloody Disgusting, you know, fabulous online source for your horror news. They posted because I was searching for like Tremors articles, something about Tremors. I came across this. So they were recommending an episode of a podcast called Horror Queers, and basically the title of this episode was "The Homoeroticism Beneath the Surface of Tremors." And I was just like, what in the world are you talking about? I didn't listen to the podcast. I mean, to the podcast because, well, I just didn't get around to it. But the Bloody Disgusting article they talked about how these people at least believe that it's implicit that Val and Earl are a couple, and that Rhoda is lesbian coded. What do you think of that?
I think it's quite a reach. I'm all for, seeing things through a queer lens in these modern times. I consider myself an ally. I think it is worth, being critical and thinking of things kind of in a new way. I think it's quite a reach, though. I think, with this movie ending with a big romantic Hollywood kiss.
Yeah.
That's a kind of
I know.
It's one of those, like, at a certain point, like, anyone could just argue, like, oh, well, he's just, it was a different time. He couldn't be himself. He couldn't come out of the closet. Considering I didn't even know that the screenwriter was, like, a veteran.
Yeah.
I don't think, if you want to consider it, a homoerotic film, by all means. One of my favorite early episodes of our show was talking about the gay Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes.
And it was very fun learning that I was right and that there was something to that. So, it is always worth kind of doing some digging and stuff, but I really didn't get that vibe off of the movie itself. And yeah, it pretty much nips all that in the bud. I will say it is a little refreshing for the romance to take kind of a back seat to the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Because normally that's the sort of thing that would be prioritized and would just constantly get like scenes of Val and what's her name again?
Rhonda.
Val and Rhonda, like, they would having little romantic moments and stuff like that. Pretty much like they have that one little cute moment where they sleep together on the rock.
Yeah.
And I mean sleep.
Not
time.
hooking up. Yeah, just literally sleeping. Pretty much
it's all business until the very end of the movie where they can relax and have a little kiss. And to that point, that's kind of the other reason why I don't really get any homoerotic vibes off of Val and Earl, because most of the movie is just business. It's all, we gotta pole vault, we gotta warn the people, we gotta save the people. Like, there's no time for romance, gay or otherwise, in the movie. Like, so
yeah, I'm with you. That's the other reason
I would kind of say it's a reach.
I'm with you. That I was like, this is y'all jumping to a whole lot of conclusions. Again, I had not listened to the episode, but these are the questions, or these are the talking points that the article in Bloody Disgusting mentioned. And so I was just like, are they really though? I don't think so. I will say though that what I found refreshing for a movie of the 1990s is by Val gaining confidence by going through all of this sort of stuff. He drops some of the toxic masculine vibes that he had toward the beginning. One of them, the main one I'm thinking about, is the obvious, my girl needs to look like this. Here's a selection of pictures. She needs to look like this. And at the end, he kind of realizes none of that matters because, he has feelings for Rhonda. And so I kind of think that's a refreshing take to, look at what this film did with that sort of thing back in the 1990s when that wasn't something that people were thinking about or anything like that. That was refreshing.
And that's actually, and that even kind of goes into that podcast saying she's lesbian coded because she's not wearing sexy clothes or whatever. Because that I hadn't even thought of that, but yeah, like when they know, oh, this seismologist or whatever is a girl. He's like, oh, please let her have brunette hair and green eyes and blah, 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 like,
yeah,
yada yada yada. She has to look like this. And then I think she kind of does. I think she has the right hair and eyes, if I remember correctly. So he's stopped a little bit there. But again, she's not like, the centerfold of whatever magazine was popular in 1990.
right.
And that too, like, he's kind of a neat character. It's also, going back to the why did this bomb? That's another interesting thing too. Is this was Kevin Bacon kind of at his peak?
Yeah.
Like, he went on to do a few more, like, serious films later on in his career, but this was, like, post-Footloose, and only by, like, a few years. So it's kind of crazy that his name was, like, on the cover or on the poster with that cool poster, and it still bombed. But, yeah. No, I agree with you. And I also, yeah. Sorry, guys. I like you thinking outside the box, but I gotta disagree. I don't think there's any closeted feelings in this film.
Kevin Bacon has talked about he at first was not happy with this film, and it's because of where he was at in his life. I guess he was at a low point in his life. His wife had just had a baby. He wasn't there for it. And then the movie bombed, and he literally thought his career was over. Post this, and later, because obviously he's crude out, he's still iconic to this day. Kevin Bacon is just iconic. He's Kevin Bacon. He's always iconic. And, he's gone on and done some other stuff since then. And he's kind of learned to appreciate this. He actually talked about how this was the most fun he's had on a film set was shooting this. He just wasn't in a good, frame of mind at the time. And I kind of feel bad that he didn't kind of get to enjoy the early cult status of this. Like, now he can enjoy it because, it's grown up, but he didn't get to kind of be there from the beginning because he was in the right headspace. But he's come around. He's talked about how he really likes this. He was at a screening for something in Austin regarding Tremors, a couple years ago, and he still gets involved in it. He's open to the character of Val being reprised, something like that. Obviously, Earl has passed on. He can't be reprised. I believe Miguel's also passed on. But I was just like, oh my God, this poor man. And then he also said that it was hard to talk to his wife and everything with this new baby because they were in such a remote location. I guess they had a phone installed for him so that he can call and check on them and stuff. But, that was hard too. So not a good point for Kevin Bacon, but he's come back around and learned to kind of really appreciate what Tremors represents in his career and what it represents to the people who are the fans. Because it's not like with what do we talk? We've talked about some other films with some iconic people like the butler from Arthur. He hated that movie, still hated it, even though people liked it. And then the other butler from Sunset Boulevard hated that too. So lots of fun stuff there.
Guys, don't be the butler.
Don't be the butler.
Don't be the butler in the movie.
So that is Tremors. It's just a really fun movie. I really liked Reba McEntire's character because what's funny about her character, I think, is the fact that she's kind of this parody, at least in my mind, of the type of people who are really into country music. So,
well, here's a question for you. This is the pairing of Gruesome Twosomes. Is Val and Earl the Gruesome Twosome, or is Bert and his wife the Gruesome Twosome? Because with this, the fan base of this series, Bert is kind of the fan favorite. Like, he's not technically the protagonist, but he is like everybody's favorite character. And I know in the later films, like, his wife goes away. I think they write that they got a divorce or something. But I don't know. A lot of the fans really love their funny little survivalist relationship. And they are technically the ones that are bringing the pain for some of the movie. Like, he's the one who's able to kill one for the first time. But yeah.
I will still say that's actually interesting because what's her name? It was Bert and Heather. They are enjoyable, and I love them as a couple. But if you notice, even when they talk during this movie, they're always sort of playing second fiddle. though to Val and Earl. Like when even when they come, like who comes and technically rescues them? Val and Earl. When they're out there on the rock and stuff, they are deferring to what Val and Earl think they should do. So even back when they're on the radio, they're like, "What do you want us to do?" So as cool as they are, I do still think Val and Earl are the gruesome twosome of this movie because they are the ones everyone sort of defers to. They're also, I think, the ones with the most at stake. Like, I don't think that Heather and Bert really go through much of a character change, throughout the movie.
Well, that's the thing. Like, they're definitely not the protagonists of the film. I just know that's something worth talking about because I just know in the Tremors fan community, Bert is like everybody's favorite character. At least in this particular movie, he has a wife. And there's a lot of people's favorite scene is that scene where they are just unloading on the graboid that comes out of their basement wall.
I love they just go back and just grab another one and then another one. I'm
well,
like,
that
oh
is,
my
like,
god!
Speaking of good cinematography, that is one of the best. Like, and that too. We haven't talked about a lot about the comedy aspects of this, but that is one of the best comedic bits of cinematography, because if you remember that scene, there is a comedic reveal of their wall of guns.
Oh yeah.
At first they are holding their rifles and they're shooting at the graboid and it's not doing anything. They drop their gun and run towards the wall, and the camera like dollies back and reveals just this massive arsenal. And it's ruined for me because I've seen this movie, but like anyone who has not seen this movie before, it is just a hilarious reveal of just their like just this wall of guns that they happen to have. And it also kind of flips the script on who's in danger because the graboid's far enough away that it can't reach them, and they just have all of this firepower to take it out.
Right, and because that scene when they drop it, you basically think they're toast. I don't know what they're gonna do. Why didn't they leave when they told them to? And then they go and they grab it. And then it just
well, and in the choreography and the way that camera movement is pulled off, like I'm sure that part of the comedic timing, like you think they're running, like you think they're fleeing because they drop their guns, and then like it's funny because you see the wall of guns, and then it's also funny because it's like, oh god, they're not running, they're just reloading, they're getting a new weapon.
Can we talk about how that when their worm dies, it was like the most dramatic death too, like as far as like it, like imagine the hand puppet, the person's hand was so dramatic because it was it does like the whole thing, like it's like a whole like like when you see somebody overact a death scene like on a stage, that's kind of what it did. It was like so hilarious. I was just like, this worm is too much, these people are too much, these people are absolutely wild, they are so out of pocket, and we love that for them. Because, and actually, you know what, that Bert character, I think I know why he's so loved, is because he's kind of the opposite of the usual prepper psycho guy that usually is in these monster films, who thinks he has it figured out, and then he like and then once he's gone, it's like the all is lost moment or whatever. And the fact that he wasn't, they were like conspiracy theorists and preppers and stuff, but he was so different than what you normally see in these like monster flicks or these horror films when you have somebody who's written like them, who's a prepper and who has all this stuff, and they always come across as arrogant and all that fun stuff. And so I think that's also why Bert is so loved, because he's wild, but he's likable.
Yeah, he's not, talking about Pizzagate or anything like that. So he's and that too, just jokes aside, he doesn't really talk about any wild conspiracy theories. He's just kind of, that wacky guy who lives out in the desert, and he's super prepared for the coming apocalypse if it ever comes. But he never does anything off-putting or says anything off-putting. He's just kind of that kooky guy who has a million guns.
Well, I love though that even though he's so prepped stuff, he even gets humbled because he talks about how he has all this stuff prepped, but he didn't think of underground monsters.
Yep, never thought of having to penetrate soil, but thankfully he's got that elephant gun.
I will say though, I'm surprised though that the worm got through the cinder block wall, because when that other one ran into that cement wall, it died.
True, it could be because it was brick.
That's true. You
might
never
just
know.
not have been as solid.
Well, Reba has said that she is open to returning for more Tremors fun. I did read that, so maybe
like it sounds like a few people passed away, but especially nostalgia makes a lot of money. It sounds like they're trying to do a new Tremors show. It sounds like you said they were passing it around and people have been passing on it, but a soft reboot or something. I'm kind of surprised they haven't tried it.
Yeah. Well, I also
sounds
classify
like Kevin
this
Bacon
as
would be game.
yeah, he would be game.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Universal churns something out in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, because Universal needs all the help they can get right now. But I think maybe one of the reasons why, again, I haven't seen the pilot for this, I'm just guessing, especially with Blumhouse producing the most recent attempt at an adaptation for this, is much like Poltergeist was. This is kind of also sort of like a family horror film, and I feel like Blumhouse a lot of times in their creations may have missed the mark on that. Like they maybe like I don't know, maybe they try to make it super gory or gritty or something. I don't know. Or
didn't you say that Blumhouse passed on this one though?
No, Blumhouse produced the second series and shopped it to Sci-Fi because Sci-Fi ordered the series and then Sci-Fi passed on it.
Okay, yeah. So they made it and it's made, but no one has picked it up.
Yeah, and they said other networks passed on it as well.
Blumhouse is funny because I've mentioned this when we talk about them before, but I was also just watching a thing like they produce so many films in a year. We definitely talked about this in a past episode. I refer to Blumhouse as like a machine gun. They just rapid fire anything they can, and then a couple of movies will be good. A couple of movies hit the target, and then 90% miss. And then it's like it's a cycle. Like they produce everything so cheaply because they'll just keep making a profit after all the cheap garbage they release, and then they'll have something like the Black Phone, or
Get Out,
yeah, or and even more recently they just had another big hit. But anyway, like that's kind of their MO. So. Interesting that everyone's passing on the Tremors thing. I wonder if it's ever going to get released, because it would be... I'm curious to see their take on it, because it could be one of those rare Blumhouse W's where it's actually good.
Right.
The fact that Sci-Fi is passing on it is kind of a bad sign.
Yeah, because Sci-Fi kind of takes... Sci-Fi, like, as a network, they showed stuff like the Piranha series, like...
Yeah,
they're not picky.
Yeah, so the fact they're passing on it kind of makes me think there might be something off about it. But I guess we'll find out if it ever gets released. But what I'm thinking is, like, I'm surprised Universal hasn't tried to, like, make a new movie.
I don't know how Universal Studios doesn't have Tremors the Ride. Imagine how bomb that would be.
That would be cool. But yeah, no, hopefully we see something in the future. But... I don't know if you have any other points, but I'm
ready to give my ratings.
Yes. So what do you give this one, T?
So I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea. I'm not giving it the same rating as Dale and Tucker, or Tail and Ducker, as I almost said, Dale and Tucker, simply because I feel like as good as well produced as as much as I just raved about how well edited and stuff like this, I feel like there's something missing for me and I don't know what it is.
It's probably like, well, when we talked about Tucker and Dale last episode, I mentioned how it's kind of the rare horror film with a moral message about not judging a book by its cover. This is just pure fun.
Yeah,
because I'm also giving this one 3 out of 4 whiskeys. Mainly because it's fun. That's what it is. It's super well made, but it's not like, and that too. It's screenplay wise. There's, unlike Tucker and Dale, there's nothing I can really critique to like make it better or push it up or anything like that.
Yeah.
There's no fat to trim.
Yeah.
But that being said, it's kind of hollow as far as like there being any like.
There's not a lot of depth to it.
There's no message. It's just a fun little ride. Like you you were just talking about how Universal should have a Tremors ride. That's kind of what this is. Like, this is the cinematic equivalent of a thrill ride.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, because not every movie needs to be super deep. But that being said, like, and that too. Also, like, even for the time, I think the special effects are charming. I like practical effects. These were not blowing minds even at the time. You know, there's a reason that, you know, Terminator 2 revolutionized the industry a year later. And there's a reason why, in the making of Jurassic Park, they switched from stop motion to CGI. Because this was not a film that was pushing the envelope as far as special effects. It was, as you said, hearkening back to an earlier time of like 50s monster movies, you know, with the kind of corniness. And, you know, it didn't matter that it was a hand puppet. You could see the trap door where the graboid pops out. Like, that's part of the fun of the movie.
Yeah.
So you can't really say that this is like a technical achievement or like it doesn't hit that next level. It's a really solid script, but it's not like a work of mastery or art or anything like that. It's just like a really good story, really likable characters, and excellent pacing. No boring parts, no needless fluff in any spots.
Right.
And so, yeah, 3 out of 4 for me as well.
But what do y'all think? As you always
Let
say.
us know. Yeah, absolutely. If you're listening to this on YouTube Music, thankfully there's a comment section. Maybe Spotify and Apple will get with the program with that, but you can hit us up on our X or our Threads. And yeah, it's been a while since we've said it, but if you guys ever want us to review something, you know, hit us up. We can come up with an episode off the fly if we get enough requests for something. But until next time, I've been Whiskey.
And I've been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
All right, peace, guys. See you next time. Can't believe the year is almost over.
I know, right? Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.